Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to welcome you this afternoon at IFRI, despite circumstances, because, as you know, Foreign Secretary, that's a particular day in Paris today, given the decision taken by our President for a new lockdown. But we decide to welcome you despite these circumstances, and thank you for your flexibility and availability in this context. It's a great honor and a great pleasure to welcome you at IFRI. You told us that it was not, it's not the first time for you at IFRI. You came already a few years ago. We are very pleased to welcome you because you are one of the most experienced Indian diplomats. I don't want to list all your appointments, but just to remind that you were an ambassador in the US, for instance. We will listen to you carefully about Indian foreign policy, and especially about the relation between India and France, which according to you are quite important. And as I said to you previously, we are working on that very carefully at IFRI since many years. So Foreign Secretary, the floor is yours, and once again, thank you very much for coming at IFRI this afternoon.
Namaste and bonjour. Dr. Thomas Kumar, Director of IFRI and your esteemed colleague, our Ambassador from France, Javed Mishra, my colleagues who accompanied me from Delhi, distinguished guest participants today. Je voudrais commencer par exprimer la solidarité du peuple indien avec la France dans cette lutte contre le terrorisme et le radicalisme. I want to express our sense of shock and anguish at the news we received this morning of the terrorist attack in Nice inside a church and terrorist attacks of a similar nature in Paris a few days ago. Our Prime Minister has just conveyed his condemnation in the strongest terms on this horrific and gruesome attack. He has very clearly outlined that there is no justification for terrorism under any circumstances. He has conveyed condolences to the families of the victims, as well as the people of France. And he has stated very clearly that India stands with France at this point. And if you see the popular sentiment in India, the hashtag I stand with France has gone viral in India. It is a barometer of the sentiments at the level of the common man in India. Internet is very widely prevalent. Most of our citizens have access to internet. They're expressing themselves through social media, and I think that is coming out very clearly. Since I'm at a sufficient distance, we permit I'll take off my mask. But it gives me very great pleasure to return to Paris. Dr. Gomard mentioned that I had visited IFRI, it was a long time back, but I have the pleasure of having served twice in Paris, in the 1980s and the 1990s. And it's wonderful to be back in the city. Of course, we do know that you are going through a difficult phase, both in terms of the resurgence of the number of cases of COVID, but also your current pressure in terms of radicalism and the acts of terrorism that you are facing. Returning to the city reminds me of the timeless charm and grace of the city, which has not changed over the decades. I'm thankful to IFRI for organizing this exchange at short notice, especially given constraints on account of the pandemic. I'm also happy that IFRI counts among the top think tanks, not only in France and Europe, but also globally. And I did mention, Dr. Govan, that 30 years ago between 20 and 30 years ago when I came here last, it is as prominent as it is today. Its prominence and centrality in international relations and foreign policy hasn't changed over the decades. The subject of my address today is India's foreign policy in a post-COVID world. In few world capitals, would this theme resonate better than in France? When I speak here, I know I speak among very special friends. And we are meeting first, even as the COVID pandemic continues, to remain the dominant subject of both our attention and conversations. Like France, India too has suffered enormous consequences of the pandemic. We are 20 times the size of your population, but our challenges have been, particularly daunting. Our response to the pandemic has been driven by the wisdom and evidence of science. The world has been learning and relearning how to deal with the pandemic, and so have we. We have drawn lessons at every stage, and we have not hesitated to accept the advice of our doctors and scientists, or to adopt global best practices. And in an early lockdown, we started lockdown when the caseload in India was in the hundreds, not in the thousands or the tens of thousands. It gave us time to ramp up our capacities and to prepare ourselves for the long-drawn spell of pandemic protocols. As a consequence of such messaging, often coming from the Prime Minister himself, there has been very good public awareness of the importance of wearing masks, social distancing, sanitizing, etc. As the Prime Minister mentioned today in an article that he wrote in newspapers, the fact that over 1 billion people have adopted a disciplined approach in their dealing with the COVID crisis itself is a very, very important part of that overall messaging that has gone through. This has allowed us to tackle the pandemic, keep the burden of our health infrastructure under manageable limits. The economic impact of the pandemic has been the greatest concern and challenge. During the first phase of the crisis, we announced a massive $270 billion stimulus and support package amounting to about 10% of our GDP. And this has been directed at helping low-income groups, migrants and those of the informal economy who were affected by the lockdown, marginal farmers and small businesses. We made sure that every family that was in need was provided 6 months of food grains and rations that would help them tide over the most difficult phase of this crisis. We deferred tax payments, injected liquidity into the economy, and lowered interest rates. We inaugurated a food transfer program, and this involves transferring food aid to about 800 million people, as I mentioned. And the program has been the largest in the world, covering a population that is larger than the continent of Europe. And it is still under operation as we speak. We are cautiously optimistic that India might have crossed the inflection point in this pandemic, although, as our Prime Minister mentioned, the virus is fickle. As we've seen in Europe, it could reappear. I don't think there's any place for complacency in our dealing with the crisis. But we have come down from a caseload of about 100,000 a day to about 50,000 a day today. We have created, over a period of time, 17,000 dedicated COVID facilities with 1.6 billion isolation beds. Over 1 million people are being tested daily. Our emphasis on contact tracing and testing has been very, very important and unrelenting. And our daily caseloads, of course, have come down, and 9 out of every 10 infected persons have recovered. Our fatality rate has also remained low at 1.5%. We are using digital tools for extensive contact tracing. The crisis has tested our country, but it has also resulted in a high-order national response marked by cohesion, purpose and resilience. We will carry these lessons into the post-corona phase. In the space of only 6 months, we have added enormous production capacity in terms of PPEs, testing kits, medicines, etc. I recall that when the crisis began, and I was part of the group of secretaries in the government that were dealing with this crisis, we had very, very minimal levels of capacity in terms of some of the equipment that we needed most urgently to deal with this crisis. Some of the equipment that we required highly dependent on components from other parts of the world, in particular from China. Today, we are happy to note that we have created enough capacity of all of these items, not only for ourselves, but also to be able to export these to the rest of the world. The crisis has stimulated innovation and enterprise in India. We are able to today manufacture cost-effective but high-quality critical health items for India and for the world. Some of us would recall that early in the crisis there was a huge demand for therapeutics, hydroxychloroquine, paracetamol, even antiretrovirals. All of this had to be put on the restricted list because of our own domestic requirements, but we made sure that we ramped up capacity, that we made surpluses available to ensure that we shared what we could with the international community. For the global system, of course, the pandemic has been the most catastrophic event since the Second World War. An already complicated world has become even more so with several geopolitical issues erupting simultaneously along with the pandemic. This has resulted in a fundamental rebalancing in the international system. A sobering reality of these developments is that today, more than ever before, multipolarity is relevant to the outcome. It is incumbent upon countries like India and France, as leading players, France in the European Union and globally, to play a role in mitigating the impact wherever possible. The pandemic has laid bare the economic consequences of geopolitics and the risks associated with attempts at concentration of power, along with the importance of ensuring supply chain diversification and resilience. The world needs more trusted players, and India fulfills the need for both trust and capacity. We in India have always been guided by our ancient philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or the world is one family, and it is in that context, as a pluralistic and open society, that we are in sync with the democratic sentiments and cognizant of our responsibilities in the world stage. During the pandemic, as I mentioned, we ramped up our pharmaceutical production, especially hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol, to respond to global demands. We supplied medicines to 150 countries in the wake of the COVID crisis. More than half on a non-commercial basis. These are least developed countries, developing countries needed this assistance. Our medical teams were deployed in 4 of our neighbors who were in distress. The message from India is that of a country which has the capabilities, but is helping itself and others as a force of good for international relations. And that is why the Prime Minister's call of what he calls Atmanirbhar Bharat, or a self-reliant India, is important for the world. This is not about building walls, it is about building greater strengths at home to play a more effective role within the country and outside. Atmanirbhar Bharat is a dependable Bharat as an India, an India that the world can depend upon. And today, the Prime Minister has stated that, and I think this sort of sums up what Atmanirbhar Bharat is. It is not about competition, but also about competence. It is not about dominance, but dependability. And it's not about looking within, but looking out for the world. Despite the pandemic, we have dealt with the worst crisis in decades on our border with China, and we have done so with maturity and firmness. At the same time, we have continued to ward off terrorism from across our western border. Our immediate challenges have not distracted us from broader strategic goals, especially in the Indo-Pacific region, where we are moving purposefully at multiple levels to create an open, inclusive architecture. India is emerging at the center of a network of initiatives. We are fulfilling our role as a net provider of security in the Indian Ocean region, and as a first responder in extending humanitarian assistance in times of natural disasters and marine and maritime environmental incidents. We have a cooperative, inclusive outlook as enunciated by the Prime Minister in his Sagar vision which stands for security and growth for all in the region. In Southeast Asia too, we have steadily enhanced our diplomatic and strategic engagement. With Australia, Japan and the US, there is tangible progress in realizing our shared vision. We are not seeking to target or exclude any country, but create an environment that induces all countries to operate with respect for sovereignty of others and in a manner consistent with international norms of global commons. The pandemic has accelerated global transition and will increase geopolitical competition and tension. The pandemic period has witnessed geopolitical repositioning primarily by China and the United States. The EU has also formulated its position, which has striking similarities with India, particularly with regard to maintaining strategic autonomy and our commitment to effective and reformed multilateralism. After a long time in the post-COVID world, we are witnessing a convergence of geopolitics with geoeconomics. Geopolitics is also affecting economic and technology flows. Besides security, it will also hamper efforts to address global challenges like climate change, terrorism and pandemics, as also serious emerging threats in the area of space and cybersecurity. The pandemic will also test the times for realizing the Sustainable Development Goals. What does all this mean for contemporary geopolitics? To start with, it will shape the nature and terms of India's engagement with major economies like the United States, China, the European Union, Japan, ASEAN, etc. Two, the practices that India perfects at home will inevitably become exportable abroad. They too will play out, obviously differently in different geographies. Three, the need for greater global convergence on resilient supply chains. Some of these are ongoing G2G exercises. Others would be discussions with businesses. Finally, India's own thinking about deeper global economic engagement with the world will be influenced by both geopolitical divides and pandemic pressures. There was already a reassessment of FTA, Free Trade Agreement experiences, keeping in mind the unsettling impact they've had on India's manufacturing. The attention could now well shift to becoming a part of global value chains, complemented by focused trading arrangements. This would be so especially as efforts towards making India an easier location for doing business gains traction. We are conscious of the need not just to improve our own record, but to become more competitive. The events of this year have demonstrated how imperative it is for like-minded countries to coordinate responses to various challenges that the pandemic has brought to the fore. As we collectively navigate these uncharted waters, we seek to emerge from the pandemic more resilient than ever before. We cannot afford to let multilateralism be held hostage by great power competition. A multipolar world without an international order, based on rule of law and collaboration, will lead to uncertainty and turbulence. In this context, India attaches great importance to Europe and France, Europe in general and France in particular, as independent poles in the emerging multipolar order. As India assumes membership as a non-elected member of the UN Security Council next year, we look forward to seeking collective solutions to global challenges, including global recovery from the pandemic and reform of multilateral institutions. The pandemic has reaffirmed the centrality of multilateralism in our interconnected world for not only matters of international security, but also international governance. Sadly, the pandemic revealed the shortcomings of some of the multilateral institutions which, for instance, could not even agree on the messaging for fighting the virus. The clarion call for reformed multilateralism has been sounded. The solution to the weakness of multilateral institutions does not lie in bypassing or debilitating them. We don't believe in that. But in reforming them, we do need a reformed multilateral system that responds appropriately to the emerging challenges and threats which are non-traditional in nature. In this, we are together with France in the initiative of Alliance for Multilateralism. We look forward to coordinating closely with France in the UN Security Council both on immediate challenges and in setting strategic directions for the UN system. I just had the opportunity to meet some of our key interlocutors, and I think this message is very clear that we'll work together on certain areas that are important to both our countries and what we believe is important to the rest of the international community. We are also working with France in building a series of multilateral responses to global challenges. The International Solar Alliance, which India and France jointly set up, is an extraordinarily good example. Similar is a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure, or the CDRI, where again France is a key partner, and which aims for a climate-friendly, disaster-resilient future for all. As natural disasters affect more and more of our countries, we need to invest in creating infrastructure that can be more resistant to the vagaries of climate change and cyclones and typhoons that affect our area or earthquakes. And investing in this is something that we believe is important, particularly for more vulnerable economies, developing countries. And I must mention here that India has stayed the course and on some parameters exceeded the commitments it has made in this regard in COP21. In India's push against climate change and its striving for a greener economy, driven more and more by renewable energy, the Paris Agreement of 2015 remains an article of faith and a call to action. It is in this context that I come back to the importance that India attaches to its relationship with Europe and France. For India, European unity and solidarity is a priority. We appreciate the French position with regard to European sovereignty and a common and independent defense and security posture. There is keen desire to avoid extreme choices being put forward by the current geopolitical situation. The India-France strategic partnership and the India-EU strategic partnership have become more important to achieve our economic sovereignty objectives, strengthen our strategic autonomy, advance security and equilibrium in the Indo-Pacific region, and reform and restore multilateralism. To put it more simply, when we look at our objectives of transforming India to make it more green, more digital, and more technology-driven, Europe stands out as a partner of choice. Today, technology is a source of power, and so digital sovereignty and competitiveness have acquired added significance. As independent poles in the emerging multipolar order, both France and Europe have thus acquired a new salience in India's worldview and its foreign policy. As you may notice, after several months of halt in diplomatic travel, my first trip outside India's immediate neighborhood has been to Europe, beginning with France. This is not an accident, and one of the most important diplomatic engagements that India had during the pandemic was the virtual 15th India-EU Summit in July, where we charted out a very ambitious agenda for cooperation. India's relationship with France has gone from strength to strength. In the past 2 decades, our countries became strategic partners in 1998, and this traditional relationship is enduring, trustworthy, like-minded, and all-encompassing. Our strategic embrace is tighter now than ever before, underpinned by the mutual understanding at the level of our political leadership and consolidated by the ever-expanding linkage between our two societies and economies. Both leaders, Prime Minister Modi and President Macron, attach top priority to the strategic partnership between our two countries. When I look at the agenda of our bilateral ties, there is virtually no field of human endeavor that is not covered by it. In other words, our cooperation is multifaceted and comprehensive, and there are many compelling pulls in the relationship. Briefly well on these. India and France are strong partners in the Indo-Pacific. We are united in our vision of maintaining a free, open, transparent, and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. We remain committed to upholding the rules-based international order, underpinned by the rule of law, transparency, freedom of navigation in the international seas, respect for territorial integrity and sovereignty, and peaceful resolution of disputes. Our objective remains advancing the security and economic interests of all countries having legitimate and vital interests in the region. Our Indo-Pacific concept has gained increasingly wider acceptance In this context, the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative that we tabled at the East Asia Summit last year holds considerable promise. There are several major pillars of this initiative, and we have one major partner steering that particular pillar forward, and we are working with many of our friends in this regard. India and France are also taking forward the approach on the Indo-Pacific to several cooperation mechanisms that exist between our two countries, including between the two foreign ministries, our ministries of defense, and our military and civilian entities. A testament to this is the recently held India-France-Australia trilateral dialogue, which witnessed convergence between our three countries on issues such as protecting global marine commons and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. India and France face similar non-traditional threats, as I mentioned before, in the form of radicalism, terrorism, increasingly cybersecurity challenges. In some respects, these are linked, not least because online radicalism has emerged as a pressing concern. Both India and France have suffered. The fight today is not against specific communities or individuals, but against a radical political-religious ideology that attempts to negate the progress made by secular democracies, particularly when it involves the equality of all citizens, regardless of religion or ethnicity, and the rights of women. This radical ideology espouses violence and separatism, very often fanned and supported by foreign influences. Such forces seek to destabilize pluralistic societies like ours. It was horrifying, as I mentioned, to hear about the two recent incidents. For the past 3 decades, we have experienced what unbridled radicalism can wreak and what malevolent violent forces it can unleash. The civilized world needs to act together and act with firmness to address this threat to our cherished democratic values. Friends, crisis reveals true friends and reliable partners. Through this year, striving and surviving in the face of the pandemic, India and the European Union have strengthened their bond. France has been central to the process. We await the 16th India-EU Leaders Summit in Portugal in 2021 with great optimism. This re-energized India-EU relationship adds another layer to our partnership with France. While we look for ways to reinforce each other's economic recovery and progress in the medium term, we have arrived at a point in our relationship where we need to move beyond what we do for each other and look at what we can do together for others and for our shared planet. The post-COVID world will be shaped by business and commerce, technology and sustainability. It will also be nurtured by norms and values, by old-fashioned notions of trust, reliability and stability. Whether in France or in India, these are attributes at the heart of our Republican ideals. These are attributes that define our countries at home and motivate us abroad. To borrow the words of Victor Hugo, the India-France global partnership is an idea whose time has come. With this, I conclude my remarks. Je vous remercie de votre attention et patience. Merci beaucoup.
All right, Secretary, thank you very much for your very comprehensive speech. You addressed so many points, starting with the sanitary crisis, explaining the importance of multilateralism. I will be back on this point. Mentioning the tension you have with China, insisting on the importance of the Indo-Pacific region, the dimension, and finishing about the substance of the relation between India and France. So you said so many things during your speech to present us your vision. Before asking questions from our guests and friends, I would like to question you about multilateralism, which is a key word. We have so many guests, coming in this room, speaking about multilateralism, except maybe this month's US guest or Russian guest, that's another issue. Could you define your conception of multilateralism? What does it mean for you? And the second question is, in fact, how to reinforce multilateralism? Is it through the United Nations system, or is it something more inclusive? And if it's a more inclusive multilateralism, how to set up this multilateralism? I think it's very important in Paris to have a better understanding of your definition of multilateralism, because as you said rightly, we are in a situation in which we have a multipolar world with less multilateralism. And of course, the situation in the US is certainly explaining this evolution. That's maybe part of your answer. So I'll let you respond to that and ask also our friends and guests to let me know if they want to raise a question.
Thank you, Dr. Gomar. I think the issue of multilateralism is very, the concept of multilateralism is very precious to both India and France. And it is precious to countries that believe in a democratic global order. And after all, multilateralism was created with the vision of avoiding wars, with the vision of nations working together in a collaborative manner for the good of mankind. And to some extent it has worked, but to some extent it has also shown the limits of a system that has been created in the aftermath of the Second World War. We are today in a situation where we are almost a century after the Second World War. When we examine the multilateral order today, we believe that there is a need for the global community to act to try and reform the current system as it stands, and what we call reformed multilateralism. In other words, it means that unless this collective voice of the international community is heard appropriately, and there is adequate representation for that, we will not have systems that would correctly and appropriately articulate what solutions are possible through a more consensual system. It's in that regard that India has, obviously, we have tabled several initiatives, but the most important, of course, is looking at the reformed UN Security Council. Not just in terms of its membership, but also in terms of the other important pillars of the Security Council, whether it is the concept of veto or whether it is the concept of the role that states would play in this regard. But the important thing is that today, as we deal with challenges that are not traditional, I mentioned the non-traditional threats that the globe is facing. You don't necessarily have interstate wars, you have intrastate wars. You have pandemics of the order that we have seen, and we have seen the multilateral system has not been able to respond appropriately to this. You have other threats to international peace and security. It could be cyber threats, it could be threats in the form of natural disasters, threats of a kind that I think mankind has to be willing to come together and fight together. And here I think, as I mentioned in my address as well, India and France have a major role, because we are countries that have not only a vital stake, but republicanism really means that you have to look at how the global order responds to in a democratic manner to the needs of the other. So my basic point, and to answer your question, is that in today's concept, in the construct that we know in the UN system, and including even in the Bretton Woods system, I think there is a requirement for change. Otherwise, decision making would move away from the United Nations systems to other groupings. You already have the G20, you have the G7, and the G10 concept. You have many other constructs which would then step into global decision making. the G20, for example, for the first time met in an extraordinary summit to consider the issue of the COVID-19 virus. And our Prime Minister in his intervention said that the G20 as an organization reflexively looks at economic and financial issues. It was created in the wake of the financial crisis. But today, it is important that the G20 has a people-centric globalization. It is something the G20 has taken, and the G20 did, to its credit, provide that, let us say, framework under which countries were able to provide debt relief, extend debt moratoriums beyond a certain point, extend assistance to least developed and underdeveloped economies. And I think that role will continue as we go along. On the other hand, the UN system has not been able to live up to its expectations. You had an organization that was not able to appropriately address the challenges before it, and today you have a panel that is going into examining how you can strengthen the World Health Organization to enable it to respond to challenges of nature that the world expects it to. I mean, pandemics, epidemics are cuts across borders, international boundaries. Everybody has to come together to fight it, but if you don't have an international organization that can provide the basic framework under which you can cooperate, then you have a problem. So, it's been a long answer to a short question. I apologize for that.
No, it's very, very detailed answer and very useful on this. I would like to give the chance, yes, to have a question. So last row, if you can introduce you briefly.
Hi, Nora Kite. I'm from Michelin. I would like actually to have a question to you, but before that, we know that on the first wave of COVID, actually we noticed that your trade strategy has changed. There were some restrictions or changing on regulations in your country, and which actually is affecting many industries. And hearing from you today that the improvement of the COVID situations, I think it's getting better in your country. And my question is actually, what is actually the strategy going forward on your trade situation? Whether there will be some lenient situation that will take place sooner, or is there anything else that we would need to know? Thank you.
I would suggest to take a few questions, if you don't mind, to respect our schedule. So if you can move to me and to give the microphone to Isabelle Saint-Lézard. Yeah. Stop.
Yes, thank you, Your Excellency, for your address. You briefly mentioned the crisis with China on the border areas, and said that it was the worst crisis in decades. And at the same time, you didn't really factor that crisis into India's global positioning and diplomacy, although it would seem a major parameter. So there has been a collapse of trust, obviously, between India and China for the past 5 months. And my question is, first, what will it take to sort of come back to some sort of, not trust, but dialogue? And another question is related to that crisis. It's the number of, the series of steps India has taken on the economic front, enhanced control on Chinese FDI, blocking 100 plus Chinese apps. Is that sustainable for India to be so restrictive on Chinese investments? We've heard that China had invested quite substantially in the Indian startup sectors, in Indian unicorns, and they do need that flow of money. And in the current context, where our money is quite short, it's a bit of a contradiction. So that's why I'm asking that question about the sustainability of those economic steps India has taken against China.
Thank you. We move to Jean-Luc. Jean-Luc Français. No. Yes, he's obliged to keep the microphone.
It's all right, thank you. In a way, my question will add to the previous one, but through the US and the 2 days ago, the 2+2, the third 2+2 meeting between US and India has concluded with a long joint statement which illustrates the very large range of relationship beyond the purely security parameters which have been mostly underlined by the Indian media and abroad. What is striking in this context, and here I refer as well to the kind of statement which have been published after the last Quad meeting in Tokyo a few weeks ago, is that the US Secretary of State, Mr. Pompeo, systematically put the finger on the China Communist Party with other partners being at the Quad meeting or at the 2+2 meeting a couple of days ago, are much more careful about giving the impression to have to choose between Washington and Beijing. Could you kindly, Mr. Secretary, give us an idea of the kind of debate which may happen within India amongst decision makers? I do know that the Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, repeated a few weeks ago that as far as India is concerned, there is no question of having a military alliance with whoever. Everyone understands with the US. So how to follow the tightrope between Washington and Beijing? Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Denis, just there, and after that we'll move to Sophie. No.
Thank
Ask
you.
that to touch the mic.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your presentation, delivery. I have a question about Indonesia. Indonesia is an important piece of Indo-Pacific picture. How India is viewing the interest of Indonesia towards Indo-Pacific vision, and is it moving?
Thank you. And last to Sophie.
Yes, you mentioned the ambitious agenda for cooperation you want to settle with Europe. I'd like to know, what is your perception of the Brexit difficult process? And how do you consider positioning India in this new European divide?
So, you have 5 questions. I gather them to let you pick what you want to respond. If you want to avoid some questions, you can. But I'm sure you will deal with all of them.
Well, I think those 5 questions will cover the length and breadth of whatever we have to discuss and say. But I would say certainly, I think are very, very pertinent questions that I think many of us want to articulate. The first, of course, was the issue of what you mentioned, Mishla, about trade protectionism, and whether India is, in some senses, becoming more protected, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of trade. Now, of course, what I would like to say, and I did mention that briefly also in my statement, is that what we are doing is we are developing our capacities and capabilities. But self-reliance should not be mistaken, in terms of being self-centered, creating, an island mentality which does not do justice to our very extensive external engagements. I think when we talk about creating capacities, I gave you the example of COVID-related equipment where we were very deficient, but have today emerged as being not only self-sufficient but also being able to supply this to many other countries that needed it. I'll just take it off because it's difficult to speak while you have this very watertight mask. So now, just to say that even during the COVID crisis, we took steps to liberalize our economy. We liberalized the agriculture sector, the labor sector, the coal sector. We have taken foreign direct investments in the defense sector from 49% to 74%, which means that foreign companies wanting to invest in India's defense sector, which also under our self-reliant program is looking more in terms of joint collaborations, technology, R&D, essentially working together with our partners to create capacity within India. And so we have allowed foreign companies to take majority share up to 74%. And in a certain sense, it's given us dividends, because if you see the foreign direct investments in the 5 months from April to August this year, we attracted $35.73 billion, which is 13% more than what we attracted in the same period last year. So in some senses, countries are willing, the fact that people are willing to put their money down in the Indian economy indicates that it is an economy that is still attractive, that is still commercially viable for companies that want to look at India from a long-term perspective. There was an issue with free trade agreements. I think you mentioned free trade agreements, that some of them that we have concluded over time, some of them quite some time back, we believe were not very carefully thought through or negotiated. For example, the rules of origin in these agreements have been very weak. And these have enabled goods not from those countries but from other third countries to come into India and add to our adverse trade balance. In other words, we are running an unsustainable trade balance, and we need to be able to address it. It's not different from what the United States is doing or other countries are doing. But it doesn't mean that we don't believe in free trade agreements or understandings. We are negotiating one with Europe as we speak. We are negotiating one with the United States. It means that it has to be on more equal and equitable terms. With regard to the very easy question on China, and the fact that we are facing an issue on our borders, but at the same time you mentioned about some of the decoupling efforts that you referred to. Now, you have to, if you go back, to the 1980s, the basis for a renewed relationship with China is predicated on peace and tranquility in the border areas. In other words, both countries decided, let us isolate the border and our boundary differences. Let us continue to work on it, but let it not affect the larger relationship. So we keep it, in a position which does not impact on the larger relationship. But I don't know whether COVID has anything to do with it. We are in a difficult situation. We are distracted. Many of the countries globally have been distracted. You have been distracted. But the fact that we found an unprecedented military build-up by China along our border areas in the western sector and Ladakh, the fact that there have been attempts at transgressions and attempts to alter the status quo on the ground, I think has forced us to take some steps to address the issue. Now, as a responsible country, we do believe that it's important that we talk and try and resolve our differences. I mean, diplomacy and talking on issues that are difficult is always very, very important. But we've also been very clear that we will be firm and resolute when it comes to our sovereignty and territorial integrity. We will not compromise on that. And it is in that context that we've held a number of talks with China, both at the level of senior military commanders on the ground, as well as the diplomatic level, and often the merging of the two. I think we have, I would say that have been reasonably successful in at least understanding what the solutions would offer. And we do hope that we will find solutions that both countries can agree on. By solutions, I mean solutions that disengage, that will enable our troops to disengage. It does not, it is, I think, in no one's interest to have very large concentrations of troops at close proximity. Disengagement is in the interest of all concerned. We also have a situation where it is in very, in very inhospitable geographic conditions. It is already minus 15 or minus 20 degrees Celsius. There's a very high wind chill factor. Troops from both our countries are exposed to that. It's not in our interest to do that. If we can look at disengagement, then we also can work on de-escalation from the depth areas, try and address the issue, a very complicated issue that has emerged on the ground. But we are very clear that as long as there is no peace and tranquility in the border areas, it will have an impact on the larger relationship. And we cannot expect that as business as usual. It will have an impact, and I think the resolution of this issue will also have an impact otherwise. Now, when you talk about some of the steps we've taken, we haven't done anything which is not what is already being done in terms of China's own rules and regulations. There is no automatic rule for investments into China. It is on a case-to-case prior approval basis. And this is what we've also done. We've said that for our countries that share land borders with India, we will have a government approval process. We also believe, and I did mention that it is important, we've also, the COVID crisis has awakened us, and I would say good part of the world to the need for resilient, reliable, sustainable, trusted supply chains. You mentioned there is a cost, and there has to be a cost when you want to initiate steps that would ensure that you are part of supply chains that are reliable. When you're in a crisis, you need goods. You can't suddenly be without essential wherewithal. In an interdependent world, you are dependent. And if you are dependent, you need to ensure that there is reliability in that regard. And so we are working with many of our friends and partners to ensure that there is security when it comes to supply chains, there is reliability, and there is a sustainability when it comes to it. It doesn't mean that this is something that can be achieved overnight or something that is, but it's important that we look at that issue and we try and address what is there. On the 2+2 dialogue, well, this is the third such dialogue that we had with the United States in the last 2 years. This is, you can say, a culmination of the process, the strengthening of relationships with the current administration as you go into elections in the United States. You referred to a very comprehensive, you mentioned the word long, joint statement. I think that is reflective of the what we call a comprehensive global strategic partnership. There are many words for that partnership. But it essentially means that today our partnership with the United States stands on its own. There was a time when you relied very much on the personal chemistry between the leadership. That's always important, particularly in an executive system like the United States. But also the fact that today the relationship is so multifaceted, comprehensive. When you talk about trade, the United States is our largest trading partner with $149 billion of trade. You talk about political engagements. We've had visit by our Prime Minister last year. We had President of the United States this year. We've had in the month of October alone 3 high-level visits and exchanges with the United States. We've had very strong technology and innovation partnerships, strong strategic defense partnership, but also, most important, is the people-to-people connect. We have a very strong connect in that regard, and innovation is part of that. We have contributed to the US economy, and the US has contributed to our economy. And so we do believe that if that joint statement is a long one, it is also an appropriate, it also reflects appropriately the state of our relationship, which covers practically every area. I was surprised to find that we have done so much in the health sector. We've collaborated extensively in the health sector. Today, in terms of our vaccine production, I just want to slightly digress, if you permit me to say that we manufacture 60% of the world's vaccines. India manufactures 60% of the world vaccines. We're part of Gavi, we're part of the different groups that are involved with vaccine production globally. We have 3 candidate vaccines of our own, and they're in stage 2 and stage 3 of human trials. But we also have 4 tie-ups with the US in vaccine development. And of course, we have with Russia as well. We have so there is an extensive level of tie-up because we do manufacture, as I said, a large part of the vaccines of the world, and we do believe that providing accessible, affordable vaccines is a part of our obligation globally. Our Prime Minister has made that clear, that we will be at the forefront of providing accessible, affordable vaccines to countries, particularly developing countries in our neighborhood, in Africa, in countries that require it. There's already a commitment to provide vaccines to 60 countries at cost price, that is through the Co-Vaccine and the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation that has funded this. But essentially, vaccine that we develop will be for our people, but it will also be a vaccine that will be available for those of our friends and partners around the world, across the world. But coming back to the issue that we find that health cooperation among many other areas is an important part of that. You mentioned military alliances, you mentioned Secretary Pompeo's remarks, but you also have to recall what our External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar said. He said this is about India and the United States. It's about our relationship. Right? It does not involve third countries. It is a relationship that is adequately strong, adequately extensive, and adequately, I would say, in terms of its overall reach, comprehensive to allow for a dialogue that involves just our 2 countries. With regard to Indonesia, I think Indonesia is an important country in Southeast Asia. When we talk about the Indo-Pacific partnership, we believe that ASEAN is at the centrality of it. ASEAN is key to the success of an Indo-Pacific concept and alliance, and we certainly believe that as one of the larger countries in Southeast Asia, a country that's very diverse and also very resource-rich, Indonesia has an important role, and also has a very large total state. Indonesia has an important role. We are seeing far greater exchanges with Indonesia, a great deal of interest in cooperating with us on many areas of our relationship. And certainly when the Prime Minister announced an Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative at the East Asia Summit last year, we were looking at 7 different poles, pillars of this initiative. One of those initiatives will be with Indonesia at the lead, and so they will play an important role in that regard as well. So that I think was a very, very appropriate question, and I think we have a place, important place for Indonesia in our larger regional outreach. And finally, of course, I think it was Sophie that had a question. If you could just remind me of what your, sorry, when you come to the 5th question.
Sophie is off. She asked the question and it was up. She's coming back right now. But certainly, François can elaborate a bit about the question raised by Sophie, or if Sophie wants to precise, quite briefly, if possible, because I would like to terminate. So, Sophie, if you can explain again your thoughts, it would be helpful.
Yes, I'd like to know if India will change its position on its cooperation with Europe after Brexit, and in what direction, what kind of accent will it put on new initiatives?
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, the question was Brexit oriented. I will be visiting as part of my current visit to Europe. I'll also be going to the United Kingdom. Brexit, of course, has been in many senses one of the black swan events that we did not see coming. I think if it took us by surprise, it even took UK by surprise, I think, when that decision came through. I think Europe is dealing with what exactly the implications of this are, what are the contours of Brexit. Rest of the world is also looking at it. Our relationship with the UK has been a historical one. It is a relationship that in more recent years has been largely shaped by UK's being a member of the European Union. Today, as UK exits the European Union, I think we will have to look at what would be a separate, standalone and independent relationship with the United Kingdom. One of the reasons I'm going there also is to examine exactly this issue and talk to our British friends about what they have in mind. They have certainly a vision of a new partnership with India. We are very happy to partner with them on that because we have an important component of people-to-people contacts. We have complementarities in our economies. We believe that there is a lot that we can do together on trade, on investments and technology, but also on the people-to-people front. And we will have to examine what the contours of that new partnership would be. It clearly is somewhere at a very important point in our outlook. Our team has been working on how we could look at, it means new customs arrangements, it means new tariffs arrangements, it means a whole set of different parameters and guidelines under which we will cooperate and engage with the United Kingdom, and that is something that we will have to work on, and it remains a very, very important aspect of what we would do with Europe as a continent. And also, I think UK's exit from the European Union also, in a certain sense, changes our own, I would say, to some extent, brings a different dimension to our cooperating with the European Union. The European Union is more focused, is more streamlined. The inputs of countries like France and Germany are more important because UK was an important pole, but is not there now. And I think there is scope also to look at reevaluate our relationship with Europe as we do with the United Kingdom. Not to the same extent, but it would be something that could be somewhere there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, for your speech and for your very comprehensive answers. It's time to terminate this session. As we said, it was not your first time today at IFRI. It was your third time, and I'm sure there will be a fourth time. I hope so. So please feel free to come back when you are once again in Paris. It's also a message for your ambassador. As I said previously, we have very good relations with your embassy. That's a great team, I can tell you. Very, very active, and we do hope to continue these discussions in the